you haven't truly made a choice in years. Not a real one. Not the kind born from awareness, clarity, and freedom. Instead, you've been moving, eating, scrolling, shopping, working, binging, distracting, on autopilot. A ghost behind the wheel. And worse, you felt it. Those tiny pangs of disconnection. That low hum of restlessness beneath even your happiest moments. A strange hollowness after the pleasure fades. The unsettling thought, why do I keep doing this if it doesn't even make me happy? But you keep doing it anyway. Not because you want to, because you need to. And that need doesn't feel like yours. What if I told you that addiction is not just about alcohol, drugs, or gambling? It's not confined to back alleys, nightclubs, or rehab centers. Addiction has 1,000 faces, and many of them wear a smile. They look like success, like discipline, like normalcy, like ambition, like control. But they are not control. They are compulsion wrapped in ritual. And they have one mission, to keep you numb and obedient. Addiction is not merely a chemical dependency. It is the architecture of your inner world, designed to protect you from pain while quietly stealing your agency. You don't need a substance to be an addict. You only need an escape. And we all escape from something. Let me ask you a question you might not want to answer. What do you return to when you're exhausted, lonely, uncertain, or afraid? Is it food? Your phone? Porn? Approval? Work? Drama? Shopping? Noise? Do you chase validation? Grind yourself into exhaustion? Do you laugh off your pain or bury it under achievement? Do you soothe it with entertainment? Do you scroll through other people's lives to avoid feeling your own? And here's the terrifying part. You may have built your entire identity around your addictions and called it a personality. But what if that identity isn't really you? What if addiction isn't about weakness but wounding? What if it's not a flaw in your character, but a language your soul has been using to scream? And what if society doesn't just tolerate these addictions? What if it depends on them? Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And addiction is the master of absurdity. We chase the very thing that deepens our hunger. We run from our pain and call it progress. We confuse pleasure for peace. And every day we sink deeper into a life that looks full, but feels empty. Here's the paradox. We crave freedom, yet we are enslaved by the very things we use to feel free. We long for authenticity, yet hide behind addictions that shield us from vulnerability. We want to feel alive, yet numb ourselves daily just to get through the next hour. Addiction is not the chain. It is the silence, the refusal to confront what lies beneath the surface of your habits. It is the child in you still screaming for safety, love, and presence, and getting likes, caffeine, or a raise instead. You've been told to fight your addictions, but no one taught you how to listen to them, to understand why they showed up, to see them not as enemies but as distorted attempts to survive. And survival, no matter how dysfunctional, is never meaningless. So the real question is not, how do I break this addiction? The real question is, what unbearable truth am I trying to escape? That's where we begin. Not with judgment, not with shame, but with the courage to ask, if I stopped numbing, what would I feel? What would I become? And would I still recognize myself, without the things I used to hide from myself? This isn't about giving something up. It's about coming back to who you were before you left yourself. But to do that, you need to understand why you left in the first place, and who or what led you there. Because addiction doesn't just steal your time or your health. It rewires your mind. It buries your wounds so deeply you forget they were ever yours. It wears your face and speaks in your voice. Until one day, you look in the mirror and you don't recognize who's staring back. Let's go deeper. Addiction is not the disease. It's the symptom. A desperate signal from a nervous system pushed beyond its limits, a mind fragmented by contradiction, a soul starved of connection. But what if I told you, this fragmentation is not accidental? There is a silent architecture that underlies our behavior, and its foundations are built in childhood. The Canadian physician and trauma expert Dr. Gabor Mate says, the question is never, why the addiction? But why the pain? And this pain, this inner split, doesn't begin with the addiction itself. It begins with the loss of authenticity. Imagine this: a child full of aliveness, emotion, sensitivity, and truth. That child cries when they're hurt, screams when they're scared, dances when they're joyful. They're whole, unfiltered, real. But then, something happens. They're told they're too much, too emotional, too needy, too sensitive. They learn that their natural expression makes others uncomfortable. And so, little by little, they suppress themselves to keep the love they need. They trade authenticity for attachment. And that's the first addiction. The addiction to approval. It's subtle, invisible, but it opens the door for every other addiction to follow. You begin abandoning your truth to be accepted. You begin bending your emotions to fit the mold. You begin numbing what hurts so you can keep functioning in a world that says, be normal, not honest. That's where it begins, not with the bottle or the screen or the food or the pills, but with a rupture in the self. A fracture between who you are and who you think you need to be. Carl Jung called this the creation of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the world. It's not false, it's partial. A socially acceptable slice of our being, edited for performance and survival. But the parts we repress don't vanish. They go underground. They become the shadow. And the shadow doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. It festers. It demands to be fed. Addiction is the shadow's whisper in disguise. When you compulsively seek pleasure, you're often trying to silence the parts of you that were never allowed to speak. The grief that was never held. The anger that was never safe. The fear that was never validated. The loneliness that was never acknowledged. And so, addiction becomes the ritual. The substitute for inner presence. The answer to a question we don't even remember asking. And while we soothe ourselves with distractions, modern society cheers us on. Because here's the brutal truth. A numbed population is a manageable one. A distracted mind won't revolt. A self-rejecting heart won't disrupt the system. Think about it. We live in a culture that sells self-worth through external validation. We're taught that success equals self-worth. That productivity is morality. That rest is laziness. That constant stimulation is freedom. This is not an accident. This is the machine. And addiction is its lubricant. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But what happens in a society that erases the why? That replaces meaning with marketing? Connection with consumption? Depth with dopamine? In such a world, addiction is not an outlier. It's a feature of the system. You were not born addicted. You were trained to escape yourself. Because a person who has met their pain cannot be controlled. A person who knows their shadow cannot be manipulated. A person who honors their wounds doesn't need to buy their healing. But instead of guiding people inward, society tells them to outsource everything. Feel lonely? Get likes. Feel anxious? Take a pill. Feel purposeless? Work harder. Feel sad? Shop more. Feel bored? Scroll faster. Every feeling is turned into a market. Every emotion into a commodity. And every soul into a consumer. This is not healing. It is sedation. Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher obsessed with human suffering, believed that desire is the root of all misery. That once one desire is fulfilled, another immediately takes its place, creating an endless cycle of craving. Sound familiar? This is addiction. Not just at the level of the individual, but at the level of civilization. We're all caught in the loop. The hedonic treadmill. The dopamine carousel. The endless hunger for the next hit, the next high, the next numbness. But here's the horror. The more you escape yourself, the more alien you become to your own life. You stop recognizing what joy feels like without stimulation, what peace feels like without distraction, what love feels like without performance, and slowly you begin to forget who you were before you started running. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, claimed that man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. But how can you make yourself when the you that is choosing is controlled by cravings you didn't consent to? This is the hidden problem. Addiction doesn't just steal your habits. It hijacks your identity. It replaces your choices with compulsions, and then convinces you that you chose them. It whispers, "You want this. You need this. This is who you are." And because the alternatives are silent, because they were exiled in childhood, you believe the whisper. And that belief becomes your prison. You may not realize it, but your addictions are shaping your life in ways far beyond the moments you reach for them. They shape how you speak, how you think, how you love. They influence your friendships, your ambitions, your silence, your truth. They script your inner dialogue, filter your memories, alter your sense of time, of worth, of self. And most dangerously of all, they become invisible. You no longer see the compulsion. It just is. It blends into the fabric of your routine. It hides behind phrases like, "I'm just not a morning person. I need my coffee before I can think. This is just how I unwind. This helps me stay focused. It's not that bad, everyone does it." But look closer. What is the cost of these compulsions you normalize? What do they steal from you in silence? When you avoid pain, you also avoid wisdom. When you numb discomfort, you also numb joy. When you run from fear, you run from growth. And when you ignore your inner truth for long enough, you forget it was ever yours. Let's get specific. Addiction rewires your brain's reward system. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation and pleasure, becomes hijacked. Your neural circuits start prioritizing short-term relief over long-term meaning. Every time you reach for the hit, whether it's sugar, a TikTok, porn, a cigarette, or attention, you reinforce a neurological shortcut. The brain thinks, this equals safety. This equals peace. More of this. Over time, this distorts your sense of value. You begin to crave stimulation, not satisfaction. You begin to avoid anything that doesn't offer instant feedback. You become unable to sit in silence, which is where all real truth lives. The brain adapts to this new environment. It starts pruning away the pathways for focus, discipline, and reflection. It becomes a machine that hungers, not for insight, but for escape. This is how compulsion replaces curiosity. You stop asking real questions. You stop wondering what could be different, because your nervous system becomes too exhausted to entertain the idea of change. Addiction flattens the emotional landscape, not in the sense of making you feel nothing. Sometimes it can amplify emotion, but in the sense that it shrinks your range. You begin to fear certain emotions: boredom, grief, rejection, shame, uncertainty. These become danger signals. The brain learns to interpret discomfort as a cue to escape. But these emotions are not enemies. They are messengers. Grief tells you something mattered. Shame tells you a boundary was crossed. Fear tells you there's something to learn. Even boredom is important. It points you toward creativity. But in the addicted mind, these emotions are cut off. They're replaced by reaction, distraction, sedation. You stop feeling fully, which means you stop living fully. You laugh but you don't feel joy. You cry but you don't feel release. You connect, but you don't feel intimacy. And then you wonder why life feels flat, gray, uninspired. Now we go deeper. Addiction doesn't just impact how you feel. It rewrites the very story you tell yourself about who you are. Over time, you begin to believe the addiction is you. You say, "I'm just bad with relationships. I've always been this way. I can't focus. I need this to function. I'm not disciplined. I'm not strong enough." These aren't truths. They're scripts. Conditioned beliefs reinforced by repetition, by trauma, by reward and punishment. In psychological terms, this is called learned helplessness. You stop trying to change because you've failed before. You start believing your chains are permanent. But the chains aren't real. They're neurological grooves carved by unresolved emotion. Your addiction isn't who you are. It's who you became in response to pain. But if you never examine it, never challenge the narrative, it becomes your identity. And once that happens, you will defend the very thing that's destroying you. That's the final trick. And this isn't just personal, it's cultural. We live in a world addicted to distraction, to stimulation, to outrage, to validation, to grind culture and good vibes only. Even healing becomes a performance. Self-care becomes self-commodification. Mindfulness is sold as a subscription. We see burnout as a badge of honor. We glorify emotional detachment. We say, "It is what it is," while something inside us quietly dies. This is spiritual anesthesia, administered daily by media, by marketing, by our own nervous systems trained to seek relief instead of truth. But here's the paradox. The more you numb yourself to survive this culture, the more you feed the very systems that created your pain. You become a consumer of your own destruction. Because an addicted society doesn't need to be forced into submission. It submits itself, willingly, with a smile, with a like, with a scroll, with a treat yourself. The price of unconscious addiction is not just suffering. It's the erosion of your sovereignty, your ability to choose, to think, to feel, to love, to live. Every time you reach for the distraction without reflection, you reinforce your own disempowerment. Every time you silence your pain without listening to it, you prolong the pattern. Every time you say, "This is just how life is," you give away your authorship. But what if it doesn't have to be this way? What if pain isn't the problem, but the portal? What if the emotions you've feared your entire life are actually instructions? What if you could sit in your discomfort and hear what it's trying to teach you? What if the only thing standing between you and real freedom is the courage to feel what you've spent years avoiding? It begins with a pause. 1 second. 1 breath. 1 moment where, instead of reaching for the familiar escape, you stop. Not forever. Just long enough to ask, "What am I really feeling right now?" That pause is rebellion. Because the system, both the one inside your brain and the one outside in the world, does not want you to pause. It wants you moving, consuming, reacting. It wants you sedated, obedient, overstimulated, and under-reflective. But when you pause, you take the first step toward reclaiming yourself. This is not easy. It's not clean. It's not quick. But it is possible. And it's more radical than any revolution on the streets. Because the most dangerous thing in the world is a person who has met themselves fully and stayed. So how do you begin? Feel before you flee. Addiction teaches us to flee from feelings. Healing teaches us to feel them. When the urge hits, pause. Not to fight it. Not to shame it. But to ask, what does this urge want me to avoid? Is it loneliness? Boredom? Shame? Emptiness? Name it. Speak it. Sit with it, even for just 1 minute. Gabor Mate says, the attempt to escape from pain is what creates more pain. But when you sit in it, something strange happens. You realize it won't destroy you. You realize you can survive discomfort. And eventually, you begin to understand it. Feelings are not enemies. They are feedback. They are your truth speaking in the only language it knows. Learn to listen. Withdraw the mask. Remember Jung's persona? That mask you've worn to fit in, to be loved, to appear strong? Take it off. This doesn't mean oversharing or performing vulnerability. It means being honest with yourself, with someone safe, with life. Say, I'm not okay. I don't know who I am without this habit. I'm terrified of my own silence. There is more power in those words than in 1,000 hours of pretending, because honesty is the seed of transformation. When you stop performing the healed version of yourself, you give the real you a chance to emerge. That version of you, the one beneath the mask, doesn't need to be fixed. They need to be felt, heard. Shadow work. Make the unconscious conscious. Carl Jung famously said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. Shadow work is not just therapy talk. It's a spiritual excavation. A practice of turning toward the rejected parts of you, the anger, the jealousy, the grief, the rage, the desire, and saying, I see you. I know why you're here. You write. You journal. You meditate. You walk in silence. You revisit childhood. You name the pain that's never been named. And slowly those shadow fragments begin to integrate. Not to be erased, but to be loved. When your inner child, once shamed into silence, realizes they are allowed to feel again, something miraculous happens. You no longer need the addiction to feel safe, because safety is now found in yourself. Redefine power. In the addicted mind, power means control. Control over feeling. Control over behavior. Control over outcomes. But true power is not control. It's presence. It's the ability to stay with reality even when it hurts. It's the courage to be seen in your rawest, realest state, and not flinch. And that kind of power can't be found in substances, screens, or strategies. It's found in surrender. Not to the addiction, but to the truth that you are not broken. You are not weak. You are responding exactly as a sensitive, intelligent being would, given the pain you've lived through. You are not the addiction. You are the awareness noticing the addiction. And in that awareness is infinite power. Choose meaning over numbness. Friedrich Nietzsche said, to live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. You will suffer. That's not the question. The question is, will you suffer with purpose, or without it? When you stop numbing, life gets louder. The grief you buried rises. The confusion surfaces. The emotions return. But so does your capacity to create meaning. You begin to ask, what am I here for? What is worth this pain? What kind of life would I be proud to inhabit? And when you answer those questions, not from a place of compulsion but from clarity, your suffering transforms. It becomes fuel, not a prison. Addiction steals your why. Healing gives it back. Find safe witnesses. Healing doesn't happen in isolation. The original wounds of disconnection were formed in relationships, so they must be healed through relationships. Find someone, anyone, who can sit with your truth without fixing it. A therapist, a mentor, a friend who listens without judgment. Because presence is medicine. Because when someone says, me too, you realize you are not alone, and the spell of shame begins to break. You don't need to conquer your addiction overnight. You don't need to become a different person. You don't need to be perfect to begin. You just need to ask, what truth have I been afraid to face? And then gently walk toward it, not to battle it, but to understand it. Because the real battle isn't with the addiction. It's with the belief that you're not allowed to feel. And the moment you choose to feel, fully, fiercely, unapologetically, you've already started to win. This is the rebellion. And it leads us to the deepest truth of all. Imagine this. You wake up one morning. No alarms blaring. No urgent distractions. No scroll. Just silence. And in that silence, something unfamiliar, and yet deeply known, emerges. A stillness. A voice. Yours. Not the version of you shaped by society. Not the voice of your addiction, your fear, your compulsions. But the original you. The one before the masks. Before the coping. Before the hunger for numbness. Before life taught you to run from your own skin. That self, quiet but not fragile. Gentle but not weak. Still bruised but no longer broken. And in that moment, you realize something so profound it almost takes your breath away. You were never addicted to the substance. You were addicted to escape. Escape from pain. Escape from truth. Escape from yourself. But the escape route was a trap. It promised safety but delivered separation. It numbed the pain but also your passion. It dulled your fears but also your fire. And the truth is, you don't need escape. You need reunion. With your grief. With your body. With your power. With your soul. The final, most powerful realization is this. Addiction doesn't live in the substance. It lives in the absence. Absence of presence. Absence of connection. Absence of love. Absence of self. And recovery is not the fight to remove addiction. It's the return to presence. Once you see this, the entire narrative collapses. You stop saying, I need to quit. And you start saying, I want to come home. Because when you are deeply connected to your body, to your emotions, to your truth, addiction loses its grip. Not because you forced it out, but because you no longer need what it offered. You've learned to feel again, to stay, to sit with your wounds until they become wisdom, to hold space for your sadness until it becomes strength, to breathe into your shame until it becomes self-compassion. You've become your own sanctuary. You realize that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. And here's the paradox that frees you. You were never broken. You were adapting. Every compulsion was your nervous system trying to keep you alive. Every escape was a cry for safety. Every addiction was a language your body used when words failed. You didn't need punishment. You needed understanding. Not more willpower, more wonder. The final truth is this. Your pain is not the enemy. Your pain is the doorway. The very emotions you've avoided, grief, shame, fear, anger, they are not barriers to healing. They are the healing. To feel is to remember your humanity. To stay with your truth is to become sovereign. To reclaim your story is to dissolve the illusion of control and embrace the power of choice. Because now you choose when to breathe. You choose when to pause. You choose what's worthy of your time, your love, your energy. And most of all, you choose to stop abandoning yourself. No longer chasing highs. No longer avoiding lows. No longer outsourcing your worth to performance, productivity, or pleasure. You are not your urges. You are not your compulsions. You are not your trauma. You are the one who witnesses all of it and stays. This is the beginning of a new kind of freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to no longer be ruled by what you don't understand. To walk through life awake, rooted, real, and unshakably alive. That is what awaits you beyond addiction. Not just sobriety but sovereignty. And once you taste that, you will never again trade your truth for relief. You will never again confuse comfort for peace. You will never again call escape a life. Because the most addictive thing in the world is the feeling of being fully you, with nothing to hide and no one to become. You'll look in the mirror, and for the first time in years, You won't see a problem to fix. You'll see a person worth loving, a soul worth protecting, a story worth telling. And in that reflection, you'll whisper the words that change everything. I'm still here. And that will be enough.